Good evening, everyone. My name is Brian Williams, and I want to talk about a couple of things that haven't come up tonight that are often involved in the foreclosure process. Those two things are the effects of failing to pay your condominium or homeowners association assessments. Why is that important? Now, Celia mentioned earlier that the first mortgage is first in line and that, they can close the door on everyone else. That is true. However, oftentimes, pursuant to your condominium documents as well as the statute or homeowners association documents, it's that big packet that we get when we buy our condo that most people don't really read, gives the condominium or the homeowners association the right to foreclose on your property. You're not only, a lot of these foreclosures aren't simply the banks coming in and foreclosing on you. They're actually the homeowners association or condominium associations foreclosing on you because they look at the first mortgage and see that there's sufficient equity in the home to satisfy that first mortgage, and they know that they can make an application for that surplus in their foreclosure proceeding. Now, why is that important? Because oftentimes condominium associations and homeowners associations are less forgiving than a bank may be. Oftentimes the banks are working these issues out with homeowners. However, condominium associations and homeowners associations have to answer to boards of directors who also have to answer to the rest of the members of that community. Why is that important? Because those members of the boards of directors are often less inclined to make a deal with you because they don't want to set a precedent for future purchasers or future people in that community. They don't want to say, well, I let Mr. Smith off, well, I've got to let Mrs. James off in the future. So they oftentimes are more aggressive. They don't want to work things out with you. You get a letter from an attorney and the foreclosure process begins. That's not to say that they won't work things out with you, but they're less inclined. So there is some value with paying your homeowners and condominium association assessments. By all means, pay your mortgage because that's a bigger note, but there are ramifications for failing to pay these assessments. Now, they go beyond just the foreclosure action. If, for instance, you haven't paid your assessments, you may be in violation of the rules. This may prohibit you from using community pools. This may prohibit you from other things that you may otherwise be entitled to in your community. This also affects your tenants. If you have a tenant in your condo or your homeowners association, they won't be allowed to use the pool. They may be in a situation. And, I oftentimes get asked questions. I own a condo. I haven't paid my assessments. I need to get a tenant in there so that I can start paying my assessments. I'm able to pay my mortgage, but I'm just not able to get that extra $200, $300 to pay my assessments. Well, let me get a tenant in there. Well, one thing you need to look at is your documents because they may prohibit you from doing just that. You may try to get a tenant in there. Someone may tell you you can do that, but when in fact the board of directors have to approve your new tenant, they will decline that tenant based on the fact that you haven't paid your assessments. And it happens often, and you get calls, the property manager won't approve my tenant, the board of directors won't approve my tenant, or you're in a situation where the property manager won't allow your tenant to use a particular part of that community. So I want everyone to understand that these aren't just the banks that are bringing these foreclosure actions, but these are also your condominium and homeowners associations who I guarantee you, oftentimes they have a personal counsel who sometimes is more aggressive. And I only say that because I used to represent quite a few community associations both in the Lee and Collier County areas. And in doing so, I had to deal with board of directors who didn't want to cut deals and they just wanted to move the action along so that they could get these assessments that were unpaid dealt with so that they could have money to fund the rest of the community. And so I want to emphasize that that is an important part of the process as well. And an attorney for a community association, when I did these things, and we've talked about timelines of how long these actions take. They vary, and no one can predict, how long an action may take. It may take longer in one courtroom versus another. It depends on the court's docket and how many cases are set for that particular courtroom. That being said, I can tell you that when I handled some of these for a community association, I tended to be more aggressive and try to get them set as soon as possible. One, because my clients were calling me every day asking me to do that, and two, because I had the ability to push these things along, as opposed to maybe a bank's attorney who will oftentimes have hundreds of these cases and maybe a law firm in Colorado, Texas, or somewhere else. I'm here locally and have the ability to kind of push the case along at a faster pace. That's something to be concerned with, because obviously if a association is coming after you, your foreclosure process may, the time window may narrow down. They may move these cases along a little bit faster. So I certainly want everyone to consider that when they look at those assessment payments that are coming, or they get a letter from their association saying, you know, you haven't paid your assessments, the next action is going to be referred to our legal counsel. The second issue that I want to talk about that often gets forgotten in a foreclosure action is the tenants. Some of you may be tenants. Some of you may be living there. You get a knock on your door and you're getting handed a complaint that says John or Jane Doe, who resides at location X. You're like, what did I do? I just signed a lease a couple of months ago. I had no idea that my landlord wasn't paying the mortgage, and now I'm being kicked out of the property that I just rented, or I've been renting for a few months, and I didn't do anything wrong. You're right, you didn't do anything wrong, and you do have a few rights with respect to those type of actions when they're served on you. As Celia mentioned, you should treat these foreclosure actions very seriously, and when you're served with a complaint, you need to answer it. One of the reasons, if you fail to answer it, a default could be entered against you. Why do you want to avoid that? A default being entered against you doesn't help you. It hurts you, because the case will progress a lot faster with a default judgment on the books. Another reason you want to answer that complaint, because it ensures that you will receive all the pleadings in that case. You will get a copy of what's happening next. You'll get a notice of a hearing about the summary judgment. So you will know exactly where that case is, where it stands, whether the summary judgment hearing is set for October, for example, or whether it's set for June. You will know exactly where in the process you fall and exactly how much time you as a tenant are working with. That's extremely important, because you may be looking for other housing. You may be in a situation where you need to know exactly how much time you have left. Another important issue with respect to tenants is the fact that you need to look at your lease. You need to determine whether you may have a potential cause of action against your landlord, because your landlord made you sign a lease that says you can live there for a year, and you're now being foreclosed out and you can't stay there anymore, and you're being kicked out by the bank, who you don't even know, and now you're thrown out. You're incurring costs with finding a new residence. You may have an action against your landlord with respect to that. One of the big questions that comes up in these situations is, do I have to keep paying my rent? Absolutely you do. Why? Because the landlord, although you're involved in a foreclosure action, still is in a position to evict you from that residence. They are still the title owner of that property, and they can still collect rent. Now, some people get advice, well, should I place the money in escrow, or should I place the money in the court deposit registry? Well, that is an option. You can place it if the money is in dispute, or you have some reason to dispute the money. That is definitely an option that you have. One of the things you need to consider is contacting your landlord to determine exactly where you're at, and maybe in some cases your landlord may agree to let you out of the lease. It depends. Oftentimes it's not, because they're trying to get as much money as they can before their home is taken. But you need to realize that you do have potential rights. You need to answer the complaint that you get, so that you have a full understanding of what's going on in your case. You have every right. You're named in there because you have an interest in the property, mostly because you are living there, and you have a right to go to court as well and hear exactly what's going on in your case, and you have every right to be heard. You're named in that lawsuit as well, so you have every right to show up in court and be heard. I encourage you, if you're in that situation, to do that. And as Celia said, you can ask for extensions of time in certain situations, which may in fact buy you more time, depending on your particular situation. So I encourage you to look at your condominium documents if you're in a situation of assessments, or B, look at your situation as a tenant and know that you do have some rights with respect to a foreclosure action. You don't simply have to get out right away. You have an option of discussing with the landlord the option of maybe purchasing on a short sale the property from your landlord. That is another option that tenants may have. You certainly have the option of contacting the bank's attorney, who is on the the pleading that you got served with, and maybe working out a situation when the property is in fact taken, you may be in a position to buy that property from the bank at a reduced price. So there are options out there, and you need to be fully aware of those. And the most important thing is take these things seriously, respond to them, and don't be afraid to ask questions of any of us, or ask appropriate questions when necessary, and address these things as best as possible, because the longer you wait, the worse it gets for you. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.